Welcome to the EPG Pathshala. I'm Dr. Rupneet Lali and I will be discussing the module on objectives of correction, the theory of reformation and the theory of deterrence. The learning objectives of this module are to understand the philosophy of correction and the basis of correctional administration, to understand the philosophy of deterrence and reformation, and finally, to be able to critique the deterrence and the reformation theory. Now, the primary purpose of any government, the responsibility is to protect the citizens from those who would harm them. Correction is thus a system which is embedded in a broader collection of public protection agencies and programs, and it comes into play after the accused has been caught by the law enforcement, has been prosecuted and convicted by the court system. Legal punishment may be defined as the state-authorized imposition of some form of deprivation, be it of liberty, resources, or even life, upon a person justly convicted of violation of criminal law. The earliest known codes of punishment are the codes of Hammurabi, which were back in 2000 BC, which this code expressed the well-known concept of lex talionis, that is the law of equal retaliation, further enunciated in the Mosaic Code and the ancient law of the Hebrews as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Correctional administration. The oldest penal institution is actually the jail, which is commonly called a prison in many countries, and in the modern terminology we called it a correctional institute. It is the last component of the continuum of criminal justice system. A person who has been found guilty of a crime may be subjected to a variety of punishments, whether it is fine, probation, incarceration, and even death. The correctional system is designed to keep in society at large safe by separating those from the community, those individuals who have committed crime. And this can be brought about by incarcerating the convicted criminal in a prison or in a jail. And the guiding hallmark of correctional system is the punishment of the wrongdoers. Incarceration today is the most serious and severe punishment that is short of life to which a free society can condemn an individual. The correctional administration is the administration of the services aimed at the reformation and rehabilitation of the offender. The terminology has changed from penology to correction, and this occurred in the 1950s and the 60s, which was driven by a new philosophy emphasizing rehabilitation. It was accompanied by some concrete changes in prisons, like giving more privileges to inmates and attempting to instill a more humane atmosphere inside the prisons. At least nominally, most prisons became correctional institutions and jailers or guards became correctional officers. Corrections is a generic term covering a wide variety of functions carried out by government, and increasingly also by private agencies having to do with the punishment, treatment, supervision, and management of individuals who have been accused or convicted of criminal offenses. Correctional work is a difficult and challenging one. The experience of many offenders, not all of course, who have been devoured their childhood and youth and who have been marred because their characters have somehow been affected psychologically, emotionally, and there is a financial investment which is involved in their current lifestyle and who have no intention of being corrected as such, so therefore it is extremely challenging task. The correctional administration is a program that prepares individuals to plan and manage institutional facilities and programs for housing and rehabilitating prisoners in the public and/or private sector. It also includes instructions in the principle and practice of correction, facilities, planning and management, safety and security, social and health services, staff and inmate management, budgeting, communication skills, correctional psychology, and applications to specific types of correctional facilities approaches. A prison can perform many different functions, even simultaneously. It is also a contradictory institution. The purpose of punishment in form of incarceration is not just to deter or to rehabilitate, but also to defend society from criminal premeditation through incapacitation. Correctional practice is a developing science based on an evolving dynamic between two concepts, that is punishment and rehabilitation. Society demands that criminals be punished for their behavior, thus they lose their freedom. But prisoners must also learn constructive behaviors and have positive role models if the cycle of recidivism is to be broken. Now we come to the deterrent theory. Deterrent means to deter means to abstain from doing an act. And the deterrent theory believes that if severe punishments were inflicted on the offender, it would deter him from repeating the crime. And the main purpose is to prevent criminals from doing the crime, from repeating the same crime in future. So this theory is based on the early works of classical philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes, Cesare Beccaria, and Jeremy Bentham. In fact, Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan, published in 1651, described men as neither good nor bad. People generally pursue their self-interest such as material gain. And he argued that punishment for crime must be greater than a benefit that comes from committing the crime. Cesare Beccaria, the Italian criminologist, published his treatise on crimes and punishment in 1764. He challenged the right of the state to punish crimes. His views contrasted sharply with the notion of vengeance of the state, that is the retribution, on which many governments in Europe relied upon. And he rejected the use of capital punishment and suggested that it should be replaced by imprisonment. As an advocate of the pleasure and pain principle or the hedonistic calculus, Beccaria maintained that pleasure and pain are the motives of rational people and that prevent crime. The pain of punishment must outweigh the pleasure received from committing the crime as such. Jeremy Bentham, who was also a contemporary of Beccaria, was heavily influenced by him. Bentham's utilitarian perspective of punishment identified the sources of the motivation as a key to understanding what was involved in encouragement of law-abiding behavior. And he argued that nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. And Bentham believed that morality is that which promotes the greatest happiness of the greatest number. The duty of the state, in Bentham's view, was to promote the happiness of the society by punishing and rewarding. The object of the law is to widen the happiness of the people by increasing their pleasure and also lessening the pain of the community. This theory of Bentham is based on the concept that man would desist from crime if punishment were applied swiftly, certainly, and severely. The premise from which Bentham started was that no two people are the same, no two crimes are the same, and it is the duty of the law to accommodate such variables before inflicting pain in the name of the state, for the protection of itself and other citizen members of that state. Thus, the theory of deterrence has developed from the work of all these scholars like Hobbes, Beccaria, and Bentham, and it relies on three individual components: severity, certainty, and clarity. The more severe the punishment, it is thought, the more likely that a rationally calculating human being will desist from criminal acts. And to prevent crime, criminal law must emphasize penalties to encourage citizens to obey the law. Punishment that is too severe is unjust, and punishment that is not severe enough will not deter criminals from committing crimes. Deterrence is the reason individuals are punished for violating the social contract, and it serves to maintain the agreement between the state and the people in the form of a workable social contract. Certainty of punishment means making sure that punishment takes place whenever a criminal act is committed. Classical theorists, as Beccaria, believed that if individuals know that their undesirable acts will be punished, they will refrain from offending in the future. Punishment must also be swift in order to deter crime. The closer the application of punishment to the commission of the offense, the greater its efficacy, the greater the likelihood that the offenders will realize that crime really does not pay. Thus, punishment should be severe, certain, and swift to deter crime. So the basic idea of deterrence is not only to deter the offender but also to deter the others from committing similar offences. And according to Rousseau, capital punishment is proper punishment if criminals were beyond redemption. The society needs to be protected from such offenders. And rigorous and strict punishment serves better and prevents the commission of a crime as against moderate and lesser punishment. In fact, John Salmon believes that punishment must be deterrent. The main aim of criminal law should be to make the wrongdoer an example and warning to all who are like-minded as such not to commit the crime, because then you will be punished. Now, to neutralize an inclination of the mind of criminals, punishment should be equal quantum of suffering on the offender so that it is no longer attractive for the person to commit the crime as such. And we find that deterrence is at the individual level when it is deterring one person, and it becomes general deterrence when it is aimed at the others who see through an example that if they were to do that crime, that they would be similarly punished as such. And one finds that Bean, who has said that individual deterrence is directly linked to both physical freedoms, that is, to break the law in wider society, we must be empowered in various ways, and individual deterrence is rooted in the power of an institution to prevent the offender physically from committing an offense in public spaces. Second factor is conditioning. The punishment is intended to remove the desire to offend from the offender by bringing about a psychological change in that offender. And the third is the individual fear calculus. If there is a desire to offend, it is kept in check by the fear of consequences should the person be caught. So the rationally bound person will look at it and will realize that he need not commit the crime, that the pleasure cannot outweigh the pain of the imprisonment as such. Specific deterrence works in two ways. First, an offender would be imprisoned to prevent him from committing the crime, another crime as such, for a specific period. And incapacitation is designed to be so unpleasant that it will discourage the other offenders from repeating that criminal behavior. And general or indirect deterrence focuses on general prevention of crime by making example of specific deviants. You look at the person and you say that, okay, this man broke the law and he has suffered this consequence, so therefore we better not break the law, and the public views that in terms of potential offenders are deterred. So it reduces, the aim is to reduce crime by imposing a sentence that will induce other persons who might be tempted to commit a crime to desist out of the fear of penalty. And Glenvine Williams says deterrence is the only ultimate object of punishment. It has to be a deterrent, and the chief end of the law of crime is to make the evildoer an example and warning to all that are like-minded with him. And whenever individual deterrence is used as a message to send to society, it is known as general deterrence. And difference, it can be absolute, it can be marginal. Absolute deterrence refers to the deterrent effect of a criminal prohibition backed up by a criminal justice system including policing and sanctions. And marginal deterrence refers to the effect of changes to the law, such as increases in penalty, severity effects, or the risk of detection, that is, certainty effects. And the courts have also recognized the general deterrence is more likely to be effective in preventing crime in some cases more than in the others. However, deterrence is widely invoked for almost all crimes and it's well beyond where the crime is deliberate, calculated, and carefully designed, such as white-collar crimes. There, deterrence really does not work. In broad terms, punishment may be expected to affect deterrence in one of the two ways. First, by increasing the certainty of punishment, and potential offenders may be deterred by the risk of apprehension. Secondly, the severity of the punishment may influence behavior if potential offenders weigh the consequences of their action and calculate that the risk of punishment are too severe. Radonsky and King say that people are not sent to prison primarily for their own good, but even in the hope that they will be cured of crime. It is used as a warning, as a deterrent to the others. The threat of punishment for law violators deters a large number of unknown individuals who might commit crimes if no such system existed. Now, what's the critique of this theory? The principal argument against general deterrence is that it is unfair to impose a disproportionately harsh sentence on one offender in order to deter the others from committing a similar offense. And one of the problems with this theory is that it assumes that human beings are rational actors, that they consider the consequences of their behavior before deciding to commit a crime. However, that's often not the case. In case of offenders who commit crimes under influence of drugs, alcohol, due to their temporarily impaired capacity to consider the pros and cons of their action, they are unlikely to be deterred by either the certainty or severity of punishment. Another issue is that since most crimes, including serious ones, do not result in an arrest or conviction, the overall deterrent effect of the certainty of punishment is substantially reduced. And this we find in NDPS cases, even in sexual assault cases against women. The criminal law amendments in our country have not reduced the crimes against women because the conviction rate remains abysmally low. Potential offenders are also unlikely to be aware of the modifications to punishment. How many are aware that the law has been changed, that they will get punishment of a greater degree? So the absence of data on awareness of punishment risks also makes it difficult to draw conclusions regarding the deterrent effect of sanctions, levels and prospects. Let's say for juvenile crimes, we've had a change in the law, but the argument given for deterrent message has not reduced, and has it percolated to the potential offenders? That's another question. Certainty of punishment is definitely more important than the severity of punishment. Otherwise, death sentence, which is the most severe sentence that can be given, would have an effect. But we find that factors like appeal, revision, mercy petition, delay in execution have diminished the deterrent effect of the death penalty in our country. So even we find that the death sentences get commuted to life imprisonment. And we have scholars like Daniel Lagine, leading scholars on deterrence, who have concluded that punishment certainty is far more consistently found to deter crime than punishment severity. And the extra legal consequences of crime seem at least as great a deterrent as the legal consequences. Policies in some countries like USA, in states like California, they have this 3 strikes law or mandatory minimums, which has resulted in increased imprisonment, and it has led to a wide imprisonment rate, an increased budget on the state, an increased expenditure, and they have not reduced crime in any case. So the tough approach, get tough on crime, has not been demonstrated to have a greater deterrent effect than less severe penalties. And it is also thought that punishment would deter offenders, but in reality we find that it may also harden the criminals, because once criminals are accustomed with punishment, deterrence loses its strength on such criminals. So you find some people who go in and out of prison perpetually, and there is no deterrence of going into the prison as such. Now, the theory of reformation is a more enlightened theory. Retribution and deterrence are philosophies of the classical and neoclassical schools, with their emphasis on let the punishment fit the crime. The positive school of criminology, on the other hand, emphasizes the importance of punishment fitting the criminals, not the crime but the criminals. It is the individual criminal, not the crime, that is the focal point in the positive thinking. And reformative theory has emerged out of this positive thinking. The object of punishment should be the reformation of the offender. So it is not just punishment, but it is on looking at the reformation and the rehabilitation. It aims at making the criminals as far as possible a better citizen by means of a moral and ethical training, teaching them to go straight and to become a more useful and a more meaningful citizen. The Quakers of Philadelphia in the United States in 1789 introduced the penitentiary as an alternative to harsh punishment. They felt it was possible to make offenders penitent, that is repentant, and put them back onto the straight course by segregating them through imprisonment and offering them opportunities for labor and for reflection. By the end of the progressive era, then the notion of individualized treatment had emerged as a dominant correctional philosophy and the basic contours of modern correctional system like probation, parole, juvenile justice, and all the policies and practices they entail were in place. Reformation theory is founded on the surmise that crime is not the result of an original sin in a criminal, but is much more a product of its environment, a lack of opportunity and training. And it views offenders as persons who are socially maladjusted. Punishment is therefore seen as a means of resocializing such persons with the aim of making them more useful members of society. Two aspects of Reformation approach are that the reform can come through punishment itself, and the pain of punishment is therefore expected to have a reformative merit on its own. And the idea of reform is concomitant to punishment. And this theory says that sentences such as probation, where reform is at the forefront, that you put a man under probation, supervise him, and you find that the person can be more rehabilitated. Until the present century, last century, all attempts at changing criminals, it was more of mass methods, were designed to modify the criminal in some mechanical manner. The classical theory suggested that reformation would occur if enough pain were inflicted on the offender. And the second was to change the offender's mind through meditation, through forced labor, through isolation, through work. But this was found to be not really effective. And the third message was through moralizing sermons in the name of God and so forth. And the fourth method was asking the offenders to sign a pledge or in some other ways make resolutions to live a law-abiding life. And the fifth method of reformation was more mechanical in terms of habituation by punitive regimes, including hard and dreary work in the prison and the rigid prison discipline. And these methods were examples of some changes in the criminal in the past. And though they were carried out and they are still continuing to some extent in the present era, the importance has shifted from all those since we have got to know about how human behavior occurs and can change. So 20th century researchers in the field of criminal science have brought about, in fact, a radical change in the new approach which has focused a greater individualized treatment to the criminal rather than the crime itself. So you have the Boston schools which have been set up, the Probation of Offenders Act which has been enacted throughout the world. You have parole being given to offenders who are sentenced to a term of imprisonment, indeterminate sentences, suspension of sentence, furlough. They are all the products of the reformatory theory of the 20th century. The open-air prisons, open-air institutions have emerged as a novel idea for reforming the criminals without inflicting any pain. In the open prisons, the prisoners live and primarily without the confines of a prison, and they're also murderers and none of them escape, and they prove that nobody is a born criminal. In India, in fact, the open prison experiment has proven to be highly effective. The theory of reformation strives to transform all offenders into peaceful, productive and capable citizens of society. It assumes that obviously that people can change, that the reasons of crime, of committing the crime are once they are known, they can lead ordinary and fulfilling lives as such. And the theory of reformation strives to transform all offenders into peaceful, productive and capable citizens. So you also have a few countries with their mission statements for the prison on the lines of reformation as such. According to this theory, crime is like a disease and you cannot cure by killing. The exponents of reformation theory believe that a wrongdoer should stay in prison, should serve to re-educate him, that the sentence of imprisonment should serve to reshape the personality, so re-socialize, re-educate and rehabilitate. They should not be degraded. And the solitary confinement and maiming, they are more relics of the past and they are enemies of reformation. So the ultimate aim of reformists is to bring about a change in the personality, in the character of the offender, and to make the person more useful to society as such. And we give them a second chance to come out as law-abiding behavior. And judges, while sentencing persons, look at their age, their character, and their background and the circumstances under which the crime was committed. and then look at the reformatory theory if it can apply. So in India, we have had some real landmark judgments where the courts have looked at the reformatory theory, and judges like Justice Krishna Iyer have in fact really emphasized on this component of reformation. In the Vidya-mitra case, the court held that rehabilitation and reformation are very much a part of sentencing policy in our criminal justice system, and they're aligned to current prison practices, and they're within the constitutional norms. And in that judgment, the court had also asked for the rehabilitation purpose to be explicitly to be there and by the state in terms of carrying out its duty. The Supreme Court in various judgments has focused on the therapeutic effect of imprisonment, that criminality is a curable deviance, and our prisons should be correctional homes and not cruel iron aching the soul as such. So arguments in favor of reformation include that reforming the criminal provides the state with opportunity to control crime in the future. The reformation process is also a deterrent and thus an effective condemnation of crime. It creates resources for the state for training the offender, that is, in the prison, etc. It enables the criminal to stay within society. For example, parole, probation, where they are able to discharge even their other duties. It's also an opportunity for re-socialization of the offender. However, the weaknesses which are prevalent in this theory are that reformation process is an extremely long and an expensive process. It can work only on those people who can be reformed, and who cannot be reformed, like hardcore criminals, reformation is ineffective. Persons who are highly educated or professional criminals, sometimes it may not work on them, and it neglects the potential offenders and persons who have committed crime but who are not within the arms of law, and it overlooks the claims of victims of crime. Reformation in most cases is supposed to occur in prison or in the jail. And we find that the prison environment is not conducive to reformation. A person may go out as an undergraduate in crime and come out as a postgraduate in crime if there are no correctional programs which are being run in the prison. So to achieve the object of reformation, prisoners must be put to all kinds of programs, whether it is related to vocational training, whether it is educational programs, whether it is cognitive behavior therapy programs. All these programs may be helpful, but other mechanical programs may not be helpful, like a mere putting a person to carpentry or something, because there may be a lack of correlation between what caused the offender to commit a crime and what is the treatment being given to him once inside the prison. You have to engage them as based on the individualized approach. So definitely it is an expensive process which demands a heavy infrastructure, which demands a lot of commitment and a lot of scientific approach which should be there as such. Otherwise there would be recidivism, that the chances of a prisoner, of an offender relapsing into crime would become high as such. And reformation and community corrections, the new community correction, it focuses on involving the community, including the law enforcement agencies, which help actually in the supervision and accountability and rehabilitation. And this community correction, it combines both the rehabilitation with strict control, and it uses the help of community members along with technology to ensure compliance. And we find that rehabilitation as a means to restore or return to a constructive, healthy activity as such. So whereas deterrence and incapacitation are mainly justified philosophically or classical grounds, rehabilitation is primarily a positive concept. The rehabilitation goal is based on the medical model that criminal behavior is because as a moral sickness and requires treatment. And whether it is treatment of faulty thinking and you need to reprogram rather than just treat a person as such. So the goal of reformation is also to change the person's mindset, the attitude that the criminal has, the offender has towards the thinking process, to change that mindset that no, crime really does not pay, and to reform that person as such. And we find that in countries like Norway, for instance, that their programs of reformation, which require a whole lot of investment in resources, have been extremely successful, and Scandinavian countries have in fact shut down some of their prisons because the crime rate has really reduced. And Finally, we are looking at reintegration, because ultimately the goal of reintegration is to use the criminals who have been under correctional programs and supervision once they come back into society, to prepare them to re-enter the society and reintegrate with the free community as well equipped as possible. And this part of reintegration now is being focused. It's not really different from reformation and rehabilitation, but it becomes more program focused, and things like having an employment and job training, they are becoming more important. Now, preferring one theory over the other is really not sound policy of punishment. Each theory of punishment should be used independently or combined according to the merits of the case. And judiciary in India has, through a blended jurisprudence of both deterrent theory and reformative theory, have pronounced various judgments whereby they have tried to maintain the balance in the society as per the times. Thank you.